Hi Matt, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, no problem. Good to be here.
You're an analyst at the 451 group. What exactly do you do there?
Well, I've got kind of a split role there. I've obviously worked within the CAOS commercial adoption of open source coverage, but also the other side of what I do is focused on databases and data warehousing and distributed data management and those technologies. So it's kind of a split role, but it keeps me busy.
So, we are talking about open source marketing here. This is what we will talk about.
Sure.
You're an analyst. You are used to saying the truth, and marketing is perhaps not about the truth. So I'd like to hear from you. Do you think that marketing open source project is actually about telling the truth?
Yes, actually, I would, and say that is, one of the critical things that it definitely should be about. And the reason that I think that's particularly important is as companies, as commercial open source vendors have adopted more commercial licensing to create a revenue stream around the pure open source project, they have to be very careful about how they are then marketing themselves. There's a danger if they market too much the benefits of a pure open source approach, that it actually confuses the customer, because the paying customer is actually maybe paying for the commercial license. So they have to be very careful about that, about how they balance marketing sort of the benefits of open source and the reality, which is that the software is perhaps under a commercial license.
Of course, many open source companies are happy to have your awareness or to gain it, because your reports are being read by their customers. And how should open source companies approach you in an effective way?
Sure, I think, I can't speak for all analyst firms, but in terms of the 451, what maybe makes us a little bit different is that we've always focused as a company on startup businesses, because that's where the innovation happens and that's where the interesting things happen. And obviously we still cover the big companies, but we've always had a focus on startups. And for I think for the last 3 years we've had the CAOS service. So open source startups tend to sort of radiate towards us, and as soon as we hear about a new open source startup, we immediately want to know what they're doing, what their strategy is, what type of business model they're using. So we continue to grow our knowledge there. So at the moment it's very easy for us, because of there's obviously, as soon as there's a new company, there's a lot of publicity about that, and so we'll get in contact with them and try and engage with them. Whether they're likely to become a client or not, we want to know what they're doing. But fortunately, because of the nature of the company and our open source focus, quite often those companies will come to us because they see value in speaking to us and getting some of our ideas to give them an idea about how they move the business model forward.
So as an analyst, how do you look at community-driven projects? Do you care about them at all, or do you analyze them in respect to a commercial offering?
Yeah, we certainly try. It's one of the things that's been great about some of the sessions that I've attended here at OSBC is, because our primary contact is with the vendors, but we want to make sure we're understanding how the community projects work and how vendors, the relationship between vendors and communities. So certainly, we keep an eye on those, and we have contacts obviously with people at within the Apache Foundation. And I mentioned obviously we have contacts with the Eclipse and GNOME projects, and we try to speak to those organizations as and when we can as well, just to keep an eye on how those relationships work.
So there are all these new social communication tools today, like blogs, Twitter. Are these communication tools good ways how to approach or reach you?
Definitely for us, yeah. We've had the CAOS Theory blog. Certainly since that's been going for a long time, since before I joined the company, and that has been a very useful way of keeping in contact, on an informal basis with what's going on in the open source ecosystem, if you like. And for us, to publish and have a conversation with the open source community, that it's perhaps a little bit different from the conversations that we do have with those vendors on a more formal basis and our more formal written output. So we definitely we really use the blog, and we see great value in that, and I think hopefully our clients see some value in that as well. And I've just recently started using Twitter. I have to admit I personally wasn't convinced by that, but I've just started using it, and it is a good way. There's been some good conversations, and you realise that a lot of the conversation has shifted from blogs onto there. So it's good to be on there and keep an eye on what's happening and what the community the conversation is.
So as an open source company, you'd say you should definitely blog, and you should definitely use Twitter also to do analyst relations?
I think definitely it helps. I mean, anything that gets your message out there is going to be useful. I think in terms of analyst relations, it definitely shouldn't be the primary way that you communicate with an analyst, but anything that reaches, I guess, if you can, it's difficult then if you have a blog, whether you're aiming it at developers or at the business sort of community. And I think you have to be careful about that you probably can't do both at the same time. You can do it via different channels, I would think. But it's definitely a useful way of reaching both those groups, yeah.
What are the main criteria you use when looking at an open source startup?
I mean, they're really the same, pretty much the same criteria we would use to look at any startup. I mean, when we talk to any company, we're interested in who the founders are and who the executives are, and obviously who the lead technologists are, and then it's things like the size of the company, both employee size and revenue size, if they'll tell us, and sometimes they will and sometimes they won't, and and the number of customers, the type of customers, exactly obviously what the customers are buying. So it's those, it's the same things that we would ask of, and look to from any company really. I guess, a little bit different about open source companies is you have then more metrics and in terms of things like downloads, and obviously, newer open source companies, those are often the only metrics they have to go on, so they like to talk a lot about those. We kind of take those with a pinch of salt, but it at least gives you an idea of the vibrancy of the opportunity for a company.
So when you talk to a company and they tell you we have 15,000 registered community users, do you ask yourself how many of them are active, and what do the companies answer usually?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. If they're talking, if that's what they want to talk about, then the question is, well, how many of those are active? How many of those are actually contributing? If they're contributing, where are they contributing, and how, or what benefit it could be other benefits that the company gets from that community. So that's what we're more interested then is, because then you begin to understand then the business strategy and what the company stands to gain from having an open source community or being part of an open source community, and that's really the perspective we would be looking at, those sorts of figures. Yeah.
So let's assume I run a startup and I want to get your attention. It's an open source startup. Mm-hmm. Should I hire a PR agency that gets me in touch with you, or what is the best way to do it?
I think it depends, and obviously, a lot of the communication is often PR led. But talking about blogs and Twitter and the very quickly, if there's a new project or a new company, it will rise to the attention of, I think, business users who are open source, who are interested in open source, and analysts and journalists who are interested in open source, just as it will to potential users and developers. Moving on from there, from a more business centered perspective, I mean, a lot of the companies we deal with, the initial connection is probably via a PR company, and there's a couple of good ones who really understand open source and are doing doing some good work, and they also they know us and they understand us, and they're very good. A good PR company or analyst relations company will facilitate a communication rather than trying to drive a communication. And if you look at companies like Hyperic and Jaspersoft and SpringSource and Terracotta and look at the companies they're using. There's some. It's very quickly obvious who the good companies are to go to.
When you look at these companies, do you also analyze and try to think of whether they're able to cross the chasm from the phase of appealing to innovators, early adopters, to the early majority?
Yeah, I think that's, in terms of evaluating the potential for a new company, that's one of the things. And it's difficult to put a metric on that or to define the opportunity, because often it depends on which particular sector of the market they're in. But yeah, that would definitely be one of the things that we would be asking them and be asking ourselves about how they actually monetize that whatever those downloads might be, or the community user count might be. Where does it cross into being paying customers, and how do they enable that, and what processes have they got in place to do that? Yeah, definitely.
So as an analyst, you need some data, some facts that allows you to understand the market and to relate a company to it. What are some data that you miss? What is it that you would like to have about open source adoption, about the open source business market?
It's difficult because there's lots of metrics out there, but they don't necessarily tell you the full picture. And often I find that one of the reasons for that is because the companies themselves don't have the full picture in terms of who their users are, in terms of the community users. They know one of the reasons the companies have talked a lot about downloads is because that's a number they know about. What they don't know about is what happens after that. And so there needs, we would definitely want to see, and there needs to be a way for companies to find out more about how many of those are actually using the product on a day-to-day basis, and what they're using it for and how they're using it. And because there's often a chasm, because once those users have become paying customers, then obviously the vendor knows all about them and they know all that information. But there's a gap between the download and the paying customer. And as I say, very often the vendors unfortunately don't actually know what's happening in that space. So that's an area that, and I think that's a reason why we see a lot more vendors have been investing in creating their own forges and creating community forum and trying to generate ways to capture information on how many actually users they've got and what they're using it for. And I think that's something that there's still a lot to be done there in terms of, because obviously then the problem is that everyone has different ways in which they count that. So we still need some more data on that, I think.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Good to speak to you.